Emma's world was a mosaic of vibrant colors and joyful memories, or so she believed. From the outside, the Harris family seemed idyllic, a postcard-perfect household nestled in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Emma, just 10 years old, was often seen skipping down the street with her backpack, her cheerful demeanor a reflection of the seemingly harmonious life within the walls of her home. Her father, Mr. Harris, was the kind of man everyone admired. He was charming, always quick with a joke or a kind word, and his reputation in the community was impeccable. Every weekend he would host barbecues, where neighbors gathered in their backyard, laughing and enjoying his hospitality. Emma would run around with the other children, her laughter mingling with the warm summer breeze. To her father was a hero, larger than life. Clara, her mother, was equally admired. She had a way of making people feel at home, her presence radiating warmth and comfort. She baked pies for school fundraisers, volunteered at the local shelter, and always had time for a chat with anyone who needed it. Emma often watched her mother with wide eyes, marveling at how effortlessly she seemed to balance everything. Emma's own days were filled with the simple joys of childhood. She loved spending time in the garden, where her mother grew roses and lilies. Together they'd plant new flowers, their hands caked with soil as they laughed and shared stories. In the evenings, her father would read her bedtime stories, his voice soothing her to sleep. On weekends, they'd go to the park, where Emma's favorite activity was feeding the ducks by the pond. But there were moments fleeting, almost imperceptible, that hinted at cracks in this perfect facade. Emma often noticed how her father's smile would disappear the moment they were alone. His tone, so warm and engaging in public, became sharp and cold when directed at her mother. Clara, always cheerful in front of others, would sometimes retreat into silence, her eyes shadowed by an unspoken weight. One day, Emma overheard a conversation between her parents. Their voices were low, but the tension was unmistakable. "You're never around," her father had said, his tone accusatory. "You're too busy with your own life to notice what's happening here." Clara's response was quiet but firm. "I'm doing my best, James. We all are." Emma didn't understand the words then, but she felt their weight. It was as if the air in the house grew heavier, pressing down on her small shoulders. She started to notice more the way her mother's hands trembled when she thought no one was watching, the way her father's temper flared over the smallest things. Yet, she clung to the good moments, convincing herself that they outweighed the bad. One sunny afternoon, Emma sat on the porch, sketching flowers in her notebook. Her father stepped outside, holding a glass of lemonade. "That's beautiful," he said, sitting beside her. Emma beamed at the praise, her small heart swelling with pride. "Maybe one day you'll be a famous artist," he added, ruffling her hair. For a moment, the world felt right again. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The house that once felt like a sanctuary now felt like a maze, full of hidden corners and unanswered questions. She wondered if other families had these moments too, if the laughter she heard from the neighbors' yards ever gave way to silence. It began with quiet knocks on Emma's door late at night. The sound, soft and deliberate, broke the stillness of her room and made her small body tense under the covers. At first, she thought she was imagining it. Maybe it was just the house settling or a breeze rattling the window. But when she peeked toward the door and saw the faint shadow under the frame, she knew someone was there. Her father stepped inside, his movements slow and measured. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, his voice low, but with an edge that made her uneasy. Emma shook her head, gripping her stuffed bear tightly. He sat on the edge of her bed, his weight making the mattress sink. "I just wanted to check on you," he said, smiling that same smile everyone in the world seemed to trust. But here, in the dim light of her room, it felt different, heavier, like it carried a meaning she couldn't quite understand. At first, these visits seemed harmless enough. He'd ask about her day, tell her she was his special girl, and remind her how much he loved her. But over time, his presence in her room began to feel suffocating. He lingered too long, his tone growing sharper if she didn't respond the way he wanted. One night, everything changed. Emma was woken by the familiar knock and the creak of her door opening. This time, his words carried a strange weight, and his actions blurred the line between love and control. He whispered, "This is just between us. It's our little secret. No one else needs to know." Emma didn't fully understand what was happening, but the pain she felt was real. She clutched her stuffed bear tightly, tears streaming down her face as she whispered, "Daddy, it hurts." "Please stop." He ignored her pleas, his words a twisted reassurance that this was how fathers showed love. When it was over, Emma curled into a ball, clutching the edge of her bed. Her body ached, and her tears soaked the pillow beneath her. She noticed a small red stain on her sheets, but didn't fully comprehend its significance. All she knew was that something was wrong, terribly wrong, and she felt broken in a way she couldn't explain. The next day, Emma avoided her father entirely. At breakfast, she sat silently, her eyes fixed on her plate, her appetite gone. Her mother noticed the dark circles under her eyes and asked, "Emma, are you feeling okay?" For a moment, Emma considered speaking up, but her father's warning echoed in her mind. "If you tell anyone, they'll take you away. Do you want to lose your family?" Emma shook her head, her small voice barely audible. "I'm fine." But she wasn't fine. The secret weighed on her like a boulder, pressing down on her chest. At school, she tried to focus on her lessons, but the pain lingered, both physical and emotional. She felt like a shadow of herself, retreating further into silence. One evening, Emma sat by her window, staring out at the darkened street. The world outside seemed so peaceful, so untouched by the chaos inside her home. She wished she could step out into that world and leave everything behind. But she felt trapped, her father's words tying her to a silence she didn't know how to break. Viewers, if you're moved by Emma's story and want to see how her journey unfolds, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with others. Your support helps us share more stories that matter. Have you ever faced a situation where staying silent felt like your only option? How did you find the strength to move forward? Emma's days blurred into a monotony of quiet dread and forced smiles. The once vibrant little girl who loved drawing and exploring had retreated into herself, her eyes reflecting a sadness no child should carry. She wanted desperately to tell anyone about what was happening, but fear held her back, paralyzing her every time she tried to speak. At school, Emma's teachers often praised her for being a good, quiet child. They noticed her withdrawal but assumed it was a phase, a shy nature she'd eventually outgrow. Her classmates would invite her to play, but Emma always declined, staying on the edges of the playground with her sketchbook, drawing scenes that hinted at her inner turmoil: dark clouds, locked doors, and tiny figures crying in the rain. One evening, as Emma watched her mother busy herself in the kitchen, she mustered up the courage to speak. Clutching her stuffed bear tightly against her chest, she stepped into the room. "Mama," she said softly, her voice trembling. Clara glanced over her shoulder, stirring a pot of soup. "What is it, sweetheart?" Emma hesitated, the words forming a lump in her throat. She looked at her mother's tired eyes and thought of her father's warning. "They'll take you away if you tell." Her chest tightened as she forced herself to continue. "I need to tell you something important," she whispered. Clara set the spoon down and turned to her daughter, a trace of concern crossing her face. "What's wrong, Emma?" Just as Emma opened her mouth to speak, the sound of the front door opening made her freeze. Her father's voice called out from the hallway, cheerful but commanding. Clara sighed and turned back to the stove. "Tell me later, okay? Go wash up for dinner." Emma's heart sank. She nodded and walked away, her feet dragging. That night, as she lay in bed, the familiar knock echoed through the room. She closed her eyes, tears slipping silently down her cheeks, and pretended to be asleep. But the door opened anyway. The days that followed brought more silence. Emma tried again to reach her mother, this time while they were folding laundry together. "Mama, can we talk?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Clara gave her a distracted smile. "Of course, honey. What's on your mind?" Emma hesitated, glancing toward the door to make sure they were alone. She opened her mouth, but once again the words wouldn't come. Instead, she shook her head. "Nothing," she whispered. Her mother paused, looking at her for a moment before turning back to the laundry. "You know you can tell me anything, right?" Emma nodded, but she didn't believe it. If her mother hadn't noticed her pain by now, how could she ever understand? The loneliness wrapped around her like a heavy blanket, and Emma began to feel like a ghost in her own home. One night, unable to hold it in any longer, Emma scribbled a note and slipped it into her mother's handbag. The note read, "Please help me. I'm scared. Daddy hurts me." She spent the next day at school in a state of nervous anticipation, wondering if her mother had found it. But when she came home, Clara greeted her with the same distracted smile as always. Emma's heart broke. Either her mother hadn't seen the note, or she had chosen to ignore it. Emma began to lose hope. Her silent pleas seemed to disappear into a void, unnoticed and unanswered. She stopped trying to speak, burying her pain deeper with each passing day. But in her heart, a small flicker of hope remained that one day someone would finally listen. Chapter 5. The breaking point. It was a Thursday evening when everything changed. Emma sat in her room, staring out of the window at the streetlights glowing in the dark. She had stopped sketching, stopped dreaming, and even stopped crying. There were no tears left, only the numb acceptance that this was her life, a life of silence, fear, and unanswered prayers. Downstairs, her mother, Clara, arrived home earlier than usual. The store had closed early due to a power outage, so she decided to surprise Emma with her favorite chocolate cake. As she stepped into the house, she noticed something strange. The air felt heavier, the usual hum of the television absent. Clara set the cake down on the kitchen counter and called out, "Emma? James? No answer?" Clara climbed the stairs, her footsteps soft but deliberate. She stopped outside Emma's room and heard muffled voices. Her brows furrowed. Pushing the door open, what she saw froze her in place. Emma was sitting on her bed, tears streaming down her face, while James, her husband, stood over her, his hand gripping her wrist. "James," Clara said, her voice low and trembling. "What are you doing?" He turned to her, his face a mix of anger and fear. "This isn't what it looks like," he began, his voice defensive. But Clara had already seen enough. For months she had ignored the signs, dismissing Emma's withdrawn behavior as a phase. But now, faced with the reality of her husband's actions, the truth hit her like a thunderbolt. The exhaustion, the distracted smiles, the moments she dismissed as Emma being shy, it all made sense now. "Emma," Clara said, stepping forward, her voice firm but filled with guilt. "Come here." Emma hesitated, her wide eyes darting between her parents. James's grip tightened slightly, but Clara's unwavering gaze gave her the courage to move. She pulled her wrist free and ran to her mother, burying her face in Clara's arms. "What have you done?" Clara demanded, her voice rising. She held Emma close, her own hands trembling with rage. James tried to explain, his words tumbling out in a jumbled mess of excuses. "You're never here, Clara. You're always working, always leaving me to handle everything. I was lonely. Don't you dare blame me for this," Clara snapped, her voice cutting through his excuses like a blade. "You've betrayed your family, your daughter. I don't want to hear another word." For the first time, Clara saw the man she had married for what he truly was, a manipulative, cowardly monster. And for the first time, she acted not out of fear but out of love for her daughter. "Get out," she said, her voice cold and resolute. "I never want to see you in this house again." James's face contorted with anger. "You can't just kick me out. This is my house too." Clara didn't flinch. She reached for her phone and began dialing. "Then let the police decide," she said, "because I'm done protecting you." James stared at her for a long moment, his bravado crumbling under the weight of her determination. Finally, he grabbed his coat and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. The sound echoed through the silence, but Clara and Emma stayed where they were, holding on to each other, as if their lives depended on it. The police arrived later that night, and Clara reported everything. She described the months of Emma's silence, her own ignorance, and the horrifying scene she had walked in on. The officers assured her that an investigation would begin immediately, but Clara didn't care about justice at that moment. All she cared about was Emma. They spent the night in the same bed, Clara holding Emma tightly, whispering apologies over and over. "I'm so sorry, my love," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I should have seen it. I should have protected you." Emma didn't say much, but for the first time in months, she felt a glimmer of hope. Her mother had finally listened. She wasn't alone anymore. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of changes. Clara closed her shop temporarily, determined to focus entirely on Emma. They started attending therapy sessions together, where Emma slowly began to open up about her experiences. It wasn't easy. There were days when the weight of her memories felt unbearable, but with her mother by her side, she found the strength to keep going. James was eventually arrested and faced charges for his actions. Clara testified in court, her voice steady and unyielding, while Emma watched from the gallery, holding her stuffed bear. The court's decision brought a sense of closure, but both Clara and Emma knew that healing would take time. They moved to a new town, leaving the house that held so many painful memories behind. Clara became an advocate for child protection, sharing their story with parents and communities to help others recognize the signs of abuse. Emma slowly rediscovered her love for art, using her drawings as a way to express her emotions and reclaim her voice. Their journey wasn't easy, but it was a journey they faced together. And with every step, they grew stronger, their bond unshakable. Viewers, if you found Emma's story moving, please consider liking this video, subscribing to our channel, and sharing it with others. By spreading awareness, we can help ensure that no child's cries for help go unheard. What do you think is the most important thing parents can do to protect their children? Let us know in the comments below. Your voice could make a difference.